about you. We are in chapter 4 of the book of Exodus. Exodus 4. And we're beginning with verse 1 through 9. Exodus 4, 1 through 9. Are you ladies settled? Exodus 4, 1 through 9. But Moses protested again. What if they won't believe me or listen to me? What if they say, the Lord never appeared to you? Then the Lord asked him, what is that in your hand? A shepherd's staff. Moses replied, throw it down to the ground. The Lord told him. So Moses threw down the staff, and it turned into a snake, and Moses jumped back. Then the Lord told him, reach out and grab its tail. I'm not doing that, but yeah, okay. Reach out and grab its tail. So Moses reached out and grabbed it and turned back into a shepherd's staff in his hand. Perform this sign. Okay, the Lord told him, and they will believe that the Lord their God, or the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, really has appeared to you. Then the Lord said to Moses, now put your hand inside your cloak. So Moses put his hand inside of his cloak, and when he took it out again, his hand was white as snow with a severe skin disease. Now put your hand back into your cloak, the Lord said. So Moses put his hand back in, and when he took it out again, it was healthy as the rest of his body. The Lord said to Moses, if they do not believe you and are not convinced by the first miraculous sign, they will be convinced by the second sign. And if they don't believe you or listen to you even after these two signs, then take some water from the Nile River and pour it out on dry ground. When you do, the water from the Nile will turn to blood on the ground. Okay. So once again, something that happened in chapter 3 that is happening again here in chapter 4. What does Moses do that Moses was doing back in chapter 3? Making a lot of excuses, okay? I can't, I won't, this can't happen, I don't have the ability, right? This is continually going on. Now, so once again, he brings up a question and he asks, what if they don't believe me or listen to me? Now, this is the same question that he asked 2 times earlier, and this time is even more inappropriate because this time the question is actually sinful. Okay, why would I say that the question this time is actually sinful? Why? Okay, he's arguing. Has God already told him an answer to the question? Okay, so now it's just disobedience, right? God's told him what he needed to do. God's told him that it's going to be okay. God's told him that the elders are going to listen to him, right? What? So God's already said all this stuff, right? So now Moses comes back and says, okay, what if they don't believe me? Again. Now, Moses is asking the same question for the 3rd time, and this time it is even more inappropriate. In the past, Moses doubted his calling. Now he is doubting God, right? It's one thing to doubt your calling. It's another thing to doubt God whenever he tells you that he's going to do something. So the Lord has already told them the elders will accept your message, and he refuses to believe or get on board with this. So from the words which follow this assurance, we know that Moses was not only told that the leaders of Israel will accept his leadership, but they will all work out just as God has told them that it would. So Moses, therefore, is guilty not only of unbelief, but just disobedience. You know, and I don't know if it was an unbelief or if it was just a disobedience, because later on we see he continues to argue this point, even to the fact of lying to God about his own abilities. Okay? So I believe that the text which Moses wrote, I remind you, he wrote this, okay? This is something that Moses wrote, is making his weakness an unclear belief prominent. Now, this is not necessarily understandable, but let me say a word or two about the belief of Moses, or sort of on his behalf anyway. Have you ever had to face a group of skeptics and convince them that God sent you? Let me go a step further. Based upon your conversation that you had with a bush.
Got a light joke for you right over there.
Okay, so I can sort of see his apprehension to go and tell people, hey, I spoke to a bush. The bush told me he was God, and that I was supposed to come to you and tell you that Pharaoh's going to let his people go. Okay, so I can sort of see the apprehension. Yeah, I don't really know if I want to go and I want to do that. So I find it easy to understand why Moses feared that no one would believe the story. People don't stand around talking to burning bushes. And this was unusual, but the evidence would be significant if they saw it. But if they don't see it, you know, we sit there and we understand that faith is not in what we see, but isn't faith easier when you do see it? You know, if you go to God and you say, okay, God, I see what you're doing. I know what you're doing. Even he himself has had this opportunity to see what God is doing. He saw God in the burning bush. God spoke to him. God told him what he was supposed to do. Right? Even in this story here, put your hand to your cloak. Lay the stick down. Moses is seeing all of this stuff happening. So up until this point, you can almost give him a write-off. Right? He's seen it. He's experienced it. Okay, but there's another thing to go and tell somebody that this is what God has promised. Now, once again, God has given him 3 signs for unbelievers, so to speak. For those who would not believe in his story the first time, I'm going to give you 3 different examples of how I did hear from God. I'm going to lay the stick down. He's going to become a snake. I'm going to put my hand in my jacket. It's going to become leprous. And then I'm going to take it back out again after I put it back in, and it's going to be clean. All of these different things, right? You have all of this ways to prove that not only am I who I say I am, but that I have called you to be what I've called you to be. So God still graciously deals with the weaknesses of Moses here. Did you see that? He's helping him. Okay, I understand you're still having a struggle with this. Let me help you. And in response to his question, God grants Moses the ability to perform those 3 signs. And the final sign, you notice he didn't do that one. Why didn't he do the final sign? Because he wasn't at the Nile. Absolutely. How's he going to pour water out of the Nile on the ground that's going to turn to blood? Well, he has to be at the Nile. So he's not at the Nile. So he sees 2 of these things take place. But obviously he needs to believe that if God says that the 3rd one's going to take place, it's going to take place as well, because the first 2 actually came to pass. So I believe that we can see several important impacts of these signs. First, the Israelites would believe the signs were visible evidence that God appeared to Moses in a burning bush. Pretty simple, right? If I see this, I at least understand that something happened because Moses has powers that I can't explain. Were they to refuse to believe the account of the burning bush, let them see the shepherd's staff turn into a snake and then be turned back into a staff. Let them see a hand become leprous and then restored. Let a burning bush is no longer to believe, or no harder to believe than these things, right? You know, okay, a burning bush talked to me. Well, a stick turned into a snake. Well, a hand became leprous and is no longer leprous. So these are things that sort of equate to there's something that's significant about what Moses is saying. So I think what we're going to believe what's going on. Now, second, for the Pharaoh and the Egyptians, these were signs, pre-signs of the hand of God. Not only did they emphatically prove the existence of God, of the God of the Hebrews, he also gave evidence of his superior power. So, once again, the Israelites lived where the Israelites lived, but they lived near all of these other people. Because eventually we're going to find out that they're going to go to their neighbors who are Egyptians and ask them for gold and silver before they have their big exodus. Okay, so when this is going on and when these stories are being told to the community that this is what's happening, they will have evidence that this is something that has already happened. Snakes have already been brought from sticks, and leprosy has come forth and then disappeared. Okay, blood has been poured out on the ground, and then it dries up and it's no longer blood. So these are things that they would have already seen. Now, the signs are also plague-like. And Pharaoh would do well to take heed, because that's what's going to be his downfall, right? Plagues. So, finally, when Moses had the power to reverse the harmful plague, he was able to. And Pharaoh was also instructed later on that if he did what they asked, or if Pharaoh did what Moses was asking him to do, these plagues would disappear also. Okay? And this is something that is an ongoing thing. If you do what I'm asking you to do, we're going to send flies. And if you do what I'm asking you to do, the flies will disappear. Okay? And this is something that is a routine that we're going to see as we go into the story. So, the three signs were therefore very significant, both to the Israelites and to Pharaoh. So that is verse 1 through 9. Now, we're going to get into a little bit more of the meat and sort of a story of why Moses really struggled with what he was asked to do. Verse 10 through 17. But Moses pleaded with the Lord. Okay, now once again, understand, he just told God, I need to have proof. I need to have a way to tell the people that you're God and that you've told me to do this. So God has laid out all these plans for how he's going to do this. And now all of a sudden, Moses starts again in verse 10. But Moses pleaded with the Lord, "Oh Lord, I'm not very good with words. I never have been, and I am not now. Even though you have spoken to me, I get tongue-tied and my words get tangled." Then the Lord asked Moses, "Who makes a person's mouth?" Right? Who made the person's mouth? Who decides whether people speak or do not speak? Hear or do not hear? See or do not see? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will be with you as you speak, and I will instruct you in what to say. But Moses again pleaded, "Lord, please send anyone else." Then the Lord became angry with Moses. "All right," he said, "what about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he speaks well. And look, he is on his way to meet you now. He will be delighted to see you. Talk to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with both of you as you speak, and I will instruct you both in what you do. Aaron will be your spokesman to the people. He will be your mouthpiece, and you will stand in the place of God for him. Tell him what to say. And take your shepherd's staff with you and use it to perform the miraculous signs I have shown you." Okay. So really from here on, it's sort of going downhill fast. Okay. He went from, I need to have clarification before I go tell the people. Now I need to have proof that you are who you say you are. Now, even though you created me, I don't have the ability to do what you asked me to do.
Sounds like a cop-out.
No, absolutely. That's exactly what the problem is. He doesn't want to do what God has asked him to do. Plain and simple. Here's your proof for this, okay? Acts 7, 21 through 22. This is Stephen, okay? And Stephen is preaching his last sermon, so to speak, okay? And this is what he says about Moses. When they had to abandon him, Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and raised him as her own son. Moses was taught all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was both powerful in speech and action.
Well, that could be interpreted a lot of ways, because like it could mean that his speech was revered and listened to because it was from God, or it could mean that people thought that he spoke well. I don't know.
But once again, either way you look at it, he had the ability to do what God had asked him to do.
Well, and also, like, if God wanted him to have a perfect voice and do that, he could have done that. But I think pairing up Aaron with him, if he hadn't done that, I mean, obviously God knows from beginning to end what's going to happen. So the false idol, the golden calf that was made, happened while he was up on the
Once
mountain.
again, who made the mistake? Was it Moses or Aaron?
Aaron.
Okay, so Abraham brings Lot. What happens?
Sodom.
Sodom and Gomorrah happened, right? Okay. Moses has to have Aaron. What happens? The golden calf. God has his way of doing things. He knows how he wants to do things. He allows us to do things our way. But we have to face the consequences. And that's what is going on here, because what's happening is Moses is basically saying, yes, you created me. I mean, he goes into this diatribe with him. Am I not the one who created you? Am I the one who gave you your mouth? Am I not the one who gave you your ears? Am I not the one who equipped you to do all that I've asked you to do? And if I've equipped you to do all I've asked you to do, then don't you think I'm going to get you the ability to do what I've asked you to do? And the thing is he just doesn't want to do it. So he makes all these excuses. I just want to make excuses for not doing it.
Well, I think maybe he's afraid, and sometimes we let fear decide what we're going to do.
Well, part of it might be fear. But once again, God has already proven himself to him. But multiple times in this scenario right here, I mean, just within this conversation, God has already shown him, okay, I've already made a way. First, I promised you that it's going to happen. Then I showed you how it's going to happen. And now you're still making excuses for not doing what I told you to do. It's sort of like whenever your parent tells you, right? Clean your room. And you don't clean your room. Okay? And you maybe go to your parents and say, okay, I don't have the right stuff to clean my room with. So, as a parent, you give them the rag, you give them the cleaner, you give them the vacuum. Right?
Yeah, you have all the tools now, go do it.
You have everything that you need. Go do what I've asked you to do. And 5 hours later, mom and dad come back into the room and say, your room looks exactly the same as it did. What are you doing?
It's too dark.
And then all of a sudden, there's another excuse. Every reason in the world not to clean the room. Every reason in the world not to go where God's told him to go. And people do this. We like to say, okay, God, I'll do anything you ask me to do. But not that. Right, but I won't do that. Absolutely. I'll do anything. But not that one. right? And we do this, and this is sort of what Moses is doing here, and that's why God gets mad. God is fine up to this point. He says, okay, I'll deal with it. You're wanting to make an excuse here, you're wanting to make an excuse there, but now you're getting to the point where you're not only questioning what I've asked you to do, you're questioning that my ability to do it in you and through you is impossible. So now they're not only questioning what God has told him to do, Moses is now questioning God's ability to make it happen. Right? But we all do that. So, Moses is not only doing a disservice to God by refusing to believe him and obey him, but a disservice to himself now. Moses should not trust in his own abilities, and neither should he deny his abilities, which God has given him. So God reveals in his response a displeasure that sort of has a tone of rebuke in it. And Moses is talking to his creator and is in effect saying, God, I can't do what you asked me to do because you didn't make me well enough. Because you made me flawed.
Why do you think God chose Moses and not Aaron in the first place?
Because of God's seeing of Moses' heart. It's always a matter of the heart. When God chooses someone, it's always a matter of heart for the purpose that God has. God already sees the heart of the person. Now, once again, stating that Moses was disobedient is not saying that Moses was not called, and is not saying that Moses didn't have the right heart, because once again, Moses was a defender. That's what he's always been. He was the one who wanted to free them. He was the one who was the freer of people. He went about it the wrong way. He tried to do it his own way. And it failed.
Maybe you're right, because Pharaoh might have had a different reaction to Aaron than he had to Moses, because of Moses' background.
Once again, Aaron was never in the house. Moses was in the house. Moses was the one called. It's sort of like, okay, why did God pick Joseph instead of one of his other brothers? Well, because of the heart.
The Bible said that Moses was the most humble of men.
Absolutely. Most humble of men. All the things, but once again, it wasn't his sin or his lack of sin that made it. It was his heart for God that made it possible. Okay? So anytime that God calls people, it's always God sees the heart. God looks at the heart of man. I mean, that's exactly what he tells people all the time. I don't look at the outward appearance. I look at the heart of man. I look at the heart. And that's what God is doing here. And God sees, okay, Moses, you have the ability to do what I've called you to do. And I've equipped you to do it. Now all I want you to do is do it. I just want you to be obedient. I just want you to go and do what I've asked you to do. But Moses wished to avoid the real purpose for his return. And avoiding the true purpose is a problem. So Moses continues to stall.
Don't you think those two things are in conflict, though? That if it's hard and he's so humble, but he's still questioning.
I think he's torn. No, I do believe he's torn. But once again, he's making irrational statements and qualifications for why I can't do it. And what he really needed to do to God was just say, hey, God, I don't want to do it. At least it would have been honest.
And eventually he's like, please, just send somebody else.
Right. And that's what he says, just send somebody else. But once again, God isn't mad because he is even disobedient. He's mad because he's basically stating, God, you messed up. You shouldn't have called me. I'm not the one who should do this. And how do I know that that's probably what he did? Because that's what I did. That's what I did. I ran from God for years because I knew this is what God wanted me to do. And it wasn't what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a preacher. I didn't want to do this.
But to me, you're witnessing of what you had to go through struggle. It's all throughout the Bible, and it gives us hope.
No, absolutely.
It can be done.
No, it can be. And that's the thing. Moses is still going to be used by God. God isn't giving Moses an out. He's just sort of going around the problem, which is really not that Moses can't do it. The problem is that Moses' want to isn't where it needs to be. So God's anger was not only reflected in some visible way, but it was evident in the answer which God gave to Moses. And I can't even imagine. Maybe the burning bush got even hotter at the time whenever he's having this conversation. All of a sudden, the flames just really get hot. And Moses said, oh, wait a second here. So Aaron was the best mix of sort of making Moses do what God asked him to do, but yet still allowing Moses to use his excuses. That brings us to 18 through 20, just a short little section. So Moses went back home to Jethro, his father-in-law. Please let me return to my relatives in Egypt, Moses said. I don't even know if they are still alive. Go in peace, Jethro replied. Before Moses left Midian, the Lord said to him, return to Egypt, for all those who wanted to kill you have died. So Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and headed back to the land of Egypt. In his hand, he carried the staff of God. Okay, so Moses avoids telling Jethro of God's appearance in the burning bush. Doesn't say anything about it at all. Who really want to go back to your in-law and say, hey, I spoke to a burning bush, and the bush told me I need to go back to Egypt to free my people. Okay? Once again, Jethro would have looked at him and said, you're crazy. You're not taking my kids. Right? So he doesn't say anything about where he's going, what he's doing. He sort of makes up an excuse. I don't even know if they're still alive. Okay? Well, obviously he knows they're still alive because Moses has been told to go back and free them. So he knows that the Israelites are still alive. Now, can you conceive trying to convince Jethro that you are sure that God wants you to go back based on a burning bush conversation? Once again, just the same conversation that you're going to have with the elders. I don't think that he wanted to have that conversation. So no wonder Moses wished to avoid the conversation. Avoiding the true or whole purpose for his return is one thing, but once again, Moses goes a little bit further and probably lies to basically say, I don't even know if any of my relatives are still alive. Okay? So he certainly knew that the Israelites were living. How could God send him to rescue people that were not alive? Which was, of course, Pharaoh's intention to begin with. But we know that that didn't come to pass because God was protecting the Israelites. So Moses has no reason to fear what lies ahead of him. God has assured him, and the Pharaoh who had sought to take his life was now dead. So once again, the Pharaoh that he ran from is not the same Pharaoh that he's going back to. Not necessarily. It's normally a lineage, but not, once again, during this time period, there was a lot of hinky stuff going on in Egypt. It wasn't Egyptians that were taking the throne. It was another entity altogether of Asians that had moved into the area that were doing their thing and taking over the throne. And so we don't know exactly where this Pharaoh comes from, but we do know that he has no necessary recollection of what's going on or why Moses left. I mean, you got to understand that was 40 years earlier. So this could be a 20-year-old king at this point who has no understanding or recollection of anything that happened with Moses.
You don't think that when the daughter took him to meet her child, that in the years that he grew up with the one that was there?
Once again, he may have been there with that one, but he may not have been with that one. It could have been a later birth altogether. And once again, during this time, it wasn't just an Egyptian lineage that was being handed down. It was a whole different kingship thing that was going on where, yeah, it possibly was a heir to the throne, but no one really knows who this king was at this time. Yeah.
Like the Persians or the Syrians?
Well, similar to, yes. It was a body of people who migrated into the area and just basically took over, which is why a couple of weeks ago I had mentioned the fact that the Egyptians and the Israelites could possibly pair up, which is why they wanted to kill all of the babies, because if the Egyptians and the Israelites paired up, it would overthrow their kingdom and they would lose power and everything else would happen. So when all of this is going on, we need to understand that Moses is doing what he's doing based on the probability that no one even knows what happened. He's going back, and that's exactly what it says in the story. It says, basically, you can, for all those who wanted to kill you have died. So once again, the story probably died with it. If there was somebody who killed somebody 500 years ago in a city, no one's going to remember, what happened, whatever. And I think that's the same thing, even if it was a city over or a town over, if it was something that was where there's no news and there's no internet and there's none of this other stuff, people don't remember. It's just something that, okay, it's out of sight, out of mind. Moses is gone.
Well, what would we have remembered from 1985?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. If it wasn't for news or, being able to look it up on the internet, we wouldn't remember anything. So if we're sitting there and we're looking at this as, okay, well, maybe the relatives, no, I'd say nobody remembers. I would say that it's just, they're going back to a whole new city 40 years later, because they didn't have newspapers. They didn't have, the ability to just look back and say, oh yeah, I remember, that story because it was a headline on the newspaper and it was in the, internet, and it was all on TV and everybody saw it. And we remember those things, but we aren't going to remember something that happened in Egypt, 40 years earlier when it was one thing. Do you know how many murders probably happened in that year alone in Egypt? A bunch.
When Moses does get there, there's a whole lot of trouble again.
He causes all kinds of trouble when he does get there, absolutely. But that isn't really his trouble. That's Pharaoh's trouble, because Pharaoh has a hard heart. Okay? And God's already explained that you're going to go and you're going to tell Pharaoh, but Pharaoh's going to have a hard heart and he's not going to listen to anything that you have to say. So, we do not know what exactly is going on, but it almost seems as though Moses rearranged the facts God had given to suggest that Moses needed to get back for his own people. And in fact, he did, but not for the real reason. Did Moses inadvertently confuse the facts, or did he deceptively rearrange the facts? No one really knows. But we do know this: Zipporah and her two sons returned to her father's house sometime in between, sometime in between them leaving right now and chapter 18. And I think that it actually happens sooner than later. I think that when we get into like the next chapters, we're going to start seeing that she's probably already gone. I don't think that she makes it back to Egypt. Okay? And a lot of theologians also agree with me that she does not make it back to Egypt, that because of what happens in the wilderness on the travel, she goes back home to Jethro for her safety. Okay? So Jethro, who seems to be wise and gracious man, grants Moses' request, wishing him well. And so it was that Moses set out on his way back to Egypt, taking along his wife and 2 sons. Moses, we are told, took the staff of God in his hand. How he must have studied that stick, which he had carried so long, and now was going to be used as an instrument of God. Okay, just a shepherd's staff. That's all it was. And now it is an instrument of God. So, verse 21 through 26. And the Lord told Moses, when you arrive back in Egypt, go to Pharaoh and perform all the miracles I have empowered you to do. But I will harden his heart so he will refuse to let the people go. Then you will tell him, this is what the Lord says, Israel is my firstborn son. I commanded you, let my son go so he can worship me. But since you have refused, I will now kill your firstborn son. Now, this next part is a little confusing, and I'll explain it to you. On the way to Egypt, at a place where Moses and his family had stopped for the night, the Lord confronted him and was about to kill him. But Moses' wife, Zipporah, took a flint knife and circumcised her son. She touched his feet with the foreskin and said, Now you are a bridegroom of blood to me. When she said bridegroom of blood, she was referring to the circumcision. And after that, the Lord left him alone. Okay. So our initial impression could be that these verses are inappropriate or out of place. I do believe the text has been rearranged, or I do not believe it has been. So I can only conclude that these words from the Lord to Moses were either spoken after Moses had departed the house of Jethro. In other words, when you arrive back in Egypt, go to Pharaoh and perform the miracles and all of this other stuff. That first paragraph, okay? I believe that those words were spoken after Moses had departed from the house of Jethro, or were spoken from the burning bush and recorded just for this specific reason, okay? And I really believe, or I'm inclined to believe towards the latter, because these words then provide a backdrop for the innocence depicted in verses 24 and 26. Or the incident that was depicted in verses 24 to 26. So one might, in fact, better grasp the thread of argument of verses 21 through 26 by entitling the section, Between Fathers and Sons. Okay? This is sort of a between fathers and sons thing. And it's sort of just laying groundwork, I believe. The first paragraph that talks about, you will tell him, this is what the Lord says, Israel is my firstborn son, and I command you, let my son go so he can worship me. But since you have refused, I will now kill your firstborn son. That's one son, right? Who is God's son? Israel. Okay, so Israel is God's son. That's one father son. Now, the other father son is Pharaoh and his son, who is going to lose his son, right? Now, we go into the third son. On the way to Egypt, at the place where Moses and his family had stopped for the night, the Lord confronted him and was about to kill him. Why? What? Uncircumcised. What is God's command? Or what? Absolutely. Everyone must be circumcised, or you risk death. Firstborn. Always firstborn. And once again, all male children must be circumcised. Even those in the household who weren't children. must be circumcised by the 8th day. How long have they had children?
Can you go back, when you said God's son was Israel, are you talking about the nation Israel?
Yes.
Or Jacob being Israel?
The nation Israel.
The nation Israel, okay.
Yes. And whenever it goes in here at the beginning, it says, when you arrive back in Egypt, go to Pharaoh and perform all the miracles I have empowered you to do, but I will harden his heart so he refuses to let the people go, and then he'll tell him, this is what the Lord says, Israel is my firstborn son. Okay? The nation of Israel is my firstborn son. This is who I take pride in. This is who's going to be my heir. That's really what he's saying. This is my heir. So as he's sitting here and he's looking at this thing, we've got to understand that in the backdrop, all three of these stories are getting ready to play out. And I believe that's why it's linked together, even though it looks like it's sort of out of place. All of a sudden, we're talking about Israel being God's son, and then we look at Pharaoh's son going to be killed, firstborn, and then we're talking about Moses' son. And in the whole story of things, you sort of look at it and say, okay, why is God all of a sudden? Why is it now? Okay, but Moses is circumcised. Okay, Moses is circumcised. So once again, why is circumcision such an issue now? Okay, the mom did take control and circumcise. Now, once again, what is Moses getting ready to do? Go confront Pharaoh, but what else is he going to do in regards to the people of Israel? He's going to lead them out. If the command from God is that all children must be circumcised, Moses goes back. No one's going to follow him. And Moses hadn't obeyed. So once again, we got two problems here. Moses is not being obedient to what God has commanded him to do. God is calling him to do something special. God is calling him to do something that is going to be anointed. He's going back to a people who will not follow him if the children are not circumcised. So God all of a sudden says, whoa, wait a second. I want you to know the seriousness of me being your father and me being your God who's called you to do something, and you're not even prepared to go back and get with them because you have sin in your own house. And he's sitting there and he says, okay, on the way back to Egypt, and they stopped for the night, and God confronted him and was about to kill him. Once again, I can't explain that, but we also know that he had sons, because that's what it says in the Bible, that he took his wife and sons with him. So in this, we sit here and we have to understand that God is serious about sin. God's very serious about sin. And you can't lead God's people and live there. That's why the Bible talks in Timothy and Titus about the role of an elder being above reproach. You can't lead God's people and live in sin. And that's why it even talks about the family in there, right? If you can't raise your own household properly, then you have no business being in the pulpit leading a church. And that's the seriousness of this. And God is trying to draw some seriousness here and let them know that what God has instructed them to do, they have to do. So this was not in the hope of convincing or converting Pharaoh. Instead, it was as a way to sort of awaken Moses and have the children in a relationship to where Moses can lead these people without any question.
Well, I think that's sobering to us because if we put ourselves down as any type of leadership in the church, I don't mean pastor, deacon, I mean Sunday school teacher, children, preschool, some, leader, all that kind of stuff. We're held to a very high standard. And only after 40 years of faithfulness, just because he didn't give God the glory at Meribah, he could go to the promised land. All that faithfulness, because of the high standard that God kept him to, and I think that's so great.
Because of the sin.
Right.
He didn't keep Moses out of the promise because he was old. He got Moses out of the promise because he struck a rock in anger. That was his one sin that kept him out. I struck a rock in anger.
All should be kept to a higher standard, not just in the church, but anywhere in your life where you're witnessing to people by your actions.
No, as believers, you're right. We should be at a higher standard than what we see in the world. We should definitely look different than what we do in the world. But once again, sin, it will destroy. That's why the Bible talks about so many times, if there's sin in the camp, you got to get rid of it. I think that is sometimes even more important in the church today. And that's something that churches don't do today. If there's sin in the camp, we just let it happen. But we do. We just let it happen. It's like, okay, yeah, I know that they're sinning, but that God will deal with them. No, the Bible says if there's a cancer in your midst, you cut it out. It doesn't mean that you don't love them, and it doesn't mean that you don't pray for them. It doesn't mean that you don't try to support them. But sin in the camp will destroy a church. Yeah, sin in the camp will destroy a family. Sin in the camp will destroy a lot. Lives, absolutely. So once again, here's for the first time the nation of Israel is referred to as the firstborn son of God, because Pharaoh would not release Israel, God's firstborn son, to worship him in the desert. God would have Moses tell Pharaoh that he will kill his firstborn. And that's what it ends up being. That's what it comes down to. So what is the significance here of this statement about Pharaoh's firstborn? It would seem that it is intended to serve as a backdrop for the strange and almost bizarre incident described in 24 to 26. Here Moses, Zipporah, and the two sons are on their way to Egypt via Mount Sinai, and it would appear, and the Lord met Moses at the lodging place and seemed intent to kill him. And if it wasn't for Zipporah and her quick action, who knows? Maybe Aaron would have been the one who ended up doing it to begin with, because God can't have sin in the camp. So she takes the flint knife, circumcises the son, touches Moses with the foreskin with a rebuke, and now you are the bridegroom of blood to me. And because of her actions, God leaves Moses alone.
I think it's probably important to support him because it wasn't her faith. I can imagine him being less faithful because he was in Midian at that point. No one else had their son, had that happen to their son. And he was probably like, well, I'm just going to ride under the radar at that point. And then when he starts to move to his position of leadership, it was one of those things that he might have been different had he pushed it on her, but she was the one who took the leadership.
But obviously she knew the story.
Right.
She knew the law.
Right.
So Moses must have somehow related to her over the 40 years that he was married to her. But somewhere along the way, he didn't do it.
Well, same thing with Ruth came from the Moabites, and she that's not how she started out. flesh. He had to know this from these people who came from somewhere else to bring Jesus, or not Jesus, but our God,
Right,
and
absolutely.
the Lord into her life.
So once again,
And they took it seriously, even though that was not their initial background. Like,
Right.
They had to learn that and take it into themselves.
Mhm.
And I think that there's a lot to be said for that, especially in Ruth's case, because she was accepted by everybody.
Absolutely, because of her faith.
Came back.
Yeah. Absolutely. So what does this action of Zipporah really mean? And what is the purpose of including this in the story of Exodus? Well, I believe that this is the kind of incident which Moses would not wish to become public necessarily, let alone become part of the Holy Scriptures. But remember, Moses is who wrote this, and he could have omitted it. What then does this mean? Or where are we to learn from it? I would suggest that it is enigmatic. It is sort of the key to the entire chapter. I really do. Explaining Moses' deep-rooted resistance to obeying the call of God and return to Egypt to rescue the Israelites. It was his sin. It was where he was. And I don't know if because he had to run, because he had to flee, and remember when we were talking about how he felt about where he was and how he felt like he was just lost and everything else. Well, maybe in the middle of all of that, he just said, what's the use? These are the stories. This is what, I'm supposed to believe. These are the gods of this is the God of my ancestors. But what's the use? And I think that's where he was. He was at that point where I'm a shepherd. I'm always going to be a shepherd. I had plans to be something different, and this is what I am. And he became very disillusioned, and he just didn't know what to do. But the gospel, if you would, of the Israelite was the covenant God made with Abraham and reiterated the patriarchs, and now through Moses to the people of God, the Israelites.
And doing a little bit of Googling, I found that Jethro was actually from the tribe of Ishmael, in which Ishmael was circumcised.
Once again, that's why I said, remember last week, or I think the week before, I said they were likely closer to the beliefs of Israel because of the heritage line. But once again, they still weren't worshiping the right God. They had the belief, because you got to understand Ishmael is also, Muhammad and everything else right now. So that's where their mindset was. They believe that there is a God, and they believe that there is one God. And some of them would even say that we worship the same God, but we worship them differently, and we don't understand the real God and all of this stuff. But once again, there is the understanding, but she's the one who made the step. She's the one who said, okay, we're going to make this thing right. So as a testimony of the parents' faith in God and God's covenant promise, every male in Israel was to be circumcised. So circumcision was the sign of the covenant, and evidence of the parents' faith in the promise of God to Abraham that through his seed blessings would come to Israel was important. The circumcision was the sign of the covenant. Wasn't that part of the covenant agreement? All of you will be circumcised after 8 days. Part of the covenant. God couldn't use Moses to take the people to the covenant promise with them being disobedient to the covenant. So there you have it. The basis of Israel's preservation as pictured by a burning bush that didn't burn up. And that was the covenant made with Abraham by an eternal God who is the I am. And the covenant was the gospel to them. the promise of blessing and salvation, which every Israelite was called upon to believe, and those whose belief was symbolized by the circumcision of their sons and the males in all the household. And Moses was to go to Egypt to tell the Israelites that God was about to fulfill his promise based upon his covenant. And yet Moses had not circumcised his son. If God takes the hardness of Pharaoh's heart so seriously as to kill his firstborn son, then he must likewise deal with the sin of Moses the same way. Does that make sense? If he's going to kill Pharaoh's son for disbelief and for not obeying the covenant, then he had to take Moses' life as well. Or he's not a just God. Okay? So according to the word of the Lord recorded in Genesis 17, his son should have been cut off from his people because of this. The holiness of God is clearly manifested in the near death of Moses. God does not look lightly upon sin. Moses' wife rightly perceived the problem and spared her husband's life. And Moses was saved by his wife's keen perception and decision making, and Moses was man enough to record it for posterity. Moses' wife and children do not appear again in the account of the Exodus until chapter 18. It may be that Zipporah and the other two sons returned to the home of Jethro at this time. In closing, verse 27 through 31, and I'll wrap it up. Now the Lord had said to Aaron, go out to the wilderness to meet Moses. So Aaron went and met Moses at the mountain of God, and he embraced him. Moses then told Aaron everything that the Lord had commanded him to say, and he told him about the miraculous signs the Lord had commanded him to perform. Then Moses and Aaron returned to Egypt and called the elders of Israel together. Aaron told them everything that the Lord had told Moses, and Moses performed the miraculous signs, and they watched. And the people of Israel were convinced that the Lord had sent Moses and Aaron. When they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshipped. So by divine revelation, God instructs Aaron to meet Moses in the wilderness. They meet on a holy mountain, and what a happy reunion it must have been. 40 years would seem to have passed since they had seen each other, and most of all, Moses had to share the most recent events of his life, especially the encounter with God at a burning bush, the commission that he had been given, and the part which Aaron was to play. Together, Moses and Aaron go back to Egypt. They meet with the elders, telling them all that God has said to Moses and performing all the signs. Both the elders of Israel and the people believed Moses and bowed to worship. This brief account of Israel's belief and worship underscores the fact that all of Moses' fears were unfounded. He had nothing to fear. It happened exactly the way God said it would happen.
It's a testament to faith. Like, just remain faithful, everything will work out.
If God says it, trust it. It's going to happen. We don't have to worry about whether it's going to happen. It goes back to my whole promises series. If God makes a promise, he's going to do it. We don't have to worry about whether he's going to do it. Good or bad, absolutely.
Think about the hope that they were given when somebody came back